a lot of the work on the surface of the moon for us. So why is it important to return humans to the moon?
Yeah, it's not an either-or proposition, right? There are some things that robots are better at and some things that humans are better at. And it turns out that humans are much better field geologists. We're really much more efficient and better at that. Plus, we can do better. We can deploy more complicated instruments, and we can use tools in ways that it's very difficult for robots to do, so we can collect better samples. And one of the great things is that we can bring back a lot of samples, right? When we do robotic sample return, it's usually a very small amount. But if you look at what we brought back from Apollo, it's a large amount of samples that literally hundreds, probably maybe thousands of scientists have been able to study over the years and over generations. And that's a lot of brain power to put behind those samples.
So again, that's how Artemis and Apollo are different. Now we're utilizing machines and people.
That's right.
To hopefully advance. Yeah.
That's right.
Perfect. Sarah, thank you so much for your time.
Thanks for having me.
So in honor of our destination, the moon, we asked you all to create moon-inspired content and share them with us using the hashtag NASA MoonSnap. We got so many wonderful submissions, so why don't we check them out now? That was a really cool look at all the different kinds of creations, recipes, and also art, and it was great to see what people submitted.
Yeah, it's awesome to see the creativity out there and how people are engaging with this mission in so many different ways.
Yeah. So I know that you didn't submit it yet, but you did create a moon snap, so to say. So why don't we take a look at that picture?
Yeah, this is one of my favorite pictures of the moon that I was able to take from orbit. I think for me, it kind of reminds me of that iconic picture of moonrise or Earthrise from the moon from Apollo. And it's kind of that in reverse. I think there's something about seeing the moon from orbit around the Earth that makes it seem a little bit easier to imagine what it'd be like to have that view from the moon looking back at our home planet.
Yeah, you should definitely submit that because that's an amazing photo. Did you take that yourself?
Yeah, out of the cupola window aboard the space station.
Wow, the resolution's great.
The cameras we have up there are incredible.
Yeah.
It's awesome.
So I haven't taken a moon snap, so I had nothing to submit. So how do you feel about creating a moon snap with me?
Let's do it.
All right, well, take that, if you don't mind lifting it up, and we're just going to snap a photo here. Oh, lighting. Perfect. So I just created a moon snap. I love it. I'm going to share it. And again, this is just to encourage people to really get involved in this mission. So we will continue to collect and share those photos. So again, if you have a NASA moon snap, just use that hashtag. Okay, Artemis 1 comes amid a very busy year and exciting year at NASA. Some of the highlights include 2 more commercial crew launches with SpaceX, Crew 4 in April, and then Crew 5 last month. In May, NASA and Boeing flew OFT-2, the second uncrewed flight test of the Starliner capsule. The goal is to certify the capsule for regular flights to the International Space Station after a crewed flight test next year. In July, we released the first images captured by our James Webb Telescope, and oh my, those are really beautiful, fascinating photos, and they're going to really help us answer some of astronomy's biggest questions about how our universe began. And then in September, we intentionally slammed the DART spacecraft into asteroid Dimorphos. Boom, look at that. And we successfully changed its course. The asteroid wasn't headed for Earth, but the test was to show we could defend our planet if needed. And recently, 2 other missions that benefit the Artemis program. Last week, we tested a new inflatable heat shield that could help us eventually land humans on Mars. And just 2 days ago, Capstone arrived at its intended orbit around the moon. The small satellite launched from New Zealand in June and will now test a unique lunar orbit for a future space station there.
Artemis 1 heralds a new era in the history of human spaceflight. It marks a pivotal next step in humanity's return to the moon, ushering in a new generation of astronauts, technology, and research. This critical flight test sets the course for a bright future at the moon. It represents our ability to safely send Artemis astronauts and critical hardware to lunar orbit. Humanity will experience Artemis in different ways than we did Apollo. We will explore new areas of the moon with 21st century materials, technologies, systems, and operations. Gateway will be humanity's first space station to orbit the moon, built with next-generation technology. Gateway will not only provide a deep space outpost for future lunar expeditions, it will also serve as a station for landers, experiments, and supplies. Starting with the core power and habitation elements, Gateway will grow with increasing capability as international partners contribute new habitat and refueling modules, observation windows, external robotics, and more. Gateway will enable longer stays and more science to be conducted on and around the moon than ever before. And one day, it will help set the stage for missions to Mars. A highly skilled, diverse core of astronauts will be selected for Artemis missions, including the first woman and first person of color to step foot on the moon. Aboard Gateway, the crew will conduct exciting research from their unique deep space vantage point. Gateway will also be a transfer station for astronauts to board innovative human landing systems that will ferry them to and from the lunar surface for exciting scientific expeditions near the South Pole. Once on the moon, Artemis astronauts will use expertise in fields like biology and geology to conduct groundbreaking research in modern spacesuits using advanced tools. They will drive new rovers to investigate the lunar terrain and unlock some of the greatest mysteries of our solar system. Artemis 1 cements our capability to send astronauts and cargo to the moon for years to come. We're going back to the moon. We are Artemis.
As we approach the opening of our 2-hour launch window, we have a special musical performance for you. America the Beautiful, played in honor of the flight test by the Philadelphia Orchestra and Yo-Yo Ma. A truly beautiful performance. It really has me feeling quite emotional right now.
Yeah, perfect tribute for tonight's launch.
You know, it's just, it gives me a sense of pride, really, to just remember that our country continues to lead our nation in space exploration. So, and as such, the White House is closely watching this historic launch. Earlier this year, Vice President Kamala Harris came down to Kennedy Space Center and met with NASA leadership as well as astronauts. She also toured our facilities where teams are working on hardware for future Artemis missions. Before leaving, she signed a piece of the Orion spacecraft that will fly on Artemis 3. She's doing it right there, which will return astronauts to the lunar surface. Okay, Kayla, time for more social questions. So let's take the first one. You know now the drill. It's going to be a celebrity question, so let's take that.
Hey guys, I'm Jack Black, and I'm super excited for the Artemis 1 launch today. I was part of a little movie called Apollo 10.5, A Space-Age Childhood, and I have a few burning queries. Question the first. How is Artemis different than Apollo?
Artemis is different than Apollo because we're returning to the moon, but this time we're going to stay. So rather than a short visit where we can do some amazing science, but it was pretty limited by these short visits, kind of a small area of the moon, we're going to the South Pole, and we're going to learn how to live there long term. So we're going to be building habitats, we're going to have rovers, we're going to have all of this infrastructure on the moon supporting scientific discovery, but also that next big step to Mars.
I love seeing celebrities also take part and ask questions because it really shows that this is something that's captivating a lot of people. So that was really fun to see Jack Black. Also, query the first. That was funny. All right, let's go to the second question. How does it feel in space?
Being in space is amazing. I mean, for us launching to orbit around the Earth and then go to the space station where I just was for 6 months, we're in an apparent microgravity environment. So for us, it feels like we're weightless, like we're floating. So you have to relearn how to live and work in that space. But once you get used to it, it's a lot of fun.
Yeah, we were just talking, Jessica Watkins, another NASA astronaut, was just here. And she was saying that actually when you came back on Earth, that was an adjustment as well because you got so used to living on the space station.
Yeah, the transition home was actually a lot harder for me than the transition up there because our vestibular systems kind of remap. We start ignoring all the sensors in our inner ear that tell us how our bodies are moving because the space environment is so strange. But we really need that on Earth to balance and control our bodies.
Sure.
So when we get back, it takes a couple of days before we feel comfortable again.
Really interesting. Thanks so much for those. Okay, so we are 10 minutes until the opening of our 2-hour launch window today. So why don't we head back over to Daryl. Daryl, tell us what's happening now.
Yeah, Megan, we actually have about 10 minutes before we go into a half-hour hold. That half-hour hold is part of the L clock, and what you see on your monitor right now, I believe, is the T clock. So in about 10 minutes, we'll hold for a half hour, and currently the launch team is trying to evaluate how much of a delay may result from some issues that we've been facing over the past hour. Just to recap those, we had a leak in a replenish valve on the mobile launcher that feeds into the liquid hydrogen core stage tank. That's been resolved. The leak has been fixed, and we're moving forward. Currently, the upper stage of the rocket for liquid hydrogen is roughly 78% at the moment. So that is tracking. Progress continues there. The core stage has been topped off, and now both liquid oxygen and liquid hydrogen are 100%, along with the upper stage of the liquid hydrogen side of the equation. So we're just waiting on the complete tanking of the upper stage liquid hydrogen. Now, with regards to the range issue that we had, we just got an update from the range, the 45th Space Wing officer reporting in to the NASA test director that the Ethernet switch has been replaced. This problematic switch took down their ability to see radar from one of their assets, which is key in getting acquisition and signal for the flight termination system if it were to be needed. Of course, this is a critical system that has to be tested before we can launch. So at the moment, we're looking still at a 1:04 a.m. Eastern Time launch. But it is pretty clear from the work that is ahead that it looks like we're going to slip into that window. How much exactly, we don't have an accurate calculation from the launch team as of right now. But of course, we're anticipating that. So for the moment, you see on your clock now, we are in the T-minus 10-minute hold. We just entered that. And now, roughly, we're looking at 28 minutes to resume terminal count. The launch team will assess what work needs to be done, how that syncs up with the range getting back online with their equipment, and then we should have a new T0 for you soon. That's the latest from Firing Room 1 here at the Kennedy Space Center. Megan, back to you.
So things are obviously still very dynamic. We're going to come back to Daryl as much as possible. Now, to understand where we are going, we have to know where we have been. To do that, we spoke to some of the special few who walked on the moon and those who sent them.
We choose to go to the moon in this decade and do the other things, not because they are easy, but because they are hard. Because that goal will serve to organize and measure the best of our energies and skills.
It's been 50 years since we've been to the moon, and we've got a great program called Artemis. We're going back. The Apollo program was a test for the American people that you can do what you set out to do. All it took was turning to it and making it happen.
We are go for a mission to the moon at this time.
Engines on 5, 4, 3, 2, all engines running. Launch commit, liftoff. We have liftoff 49 minutes past the hour.
I think the characteristic that I remember most, though, that Saturn V was the noise. The noise was enormous, and it was almost impossible to communicate.
We're go, train tight, we're go. Tranquility Base here. The Eagle has landed.
The landing to me was a great celebration. The nation was almost euphoric.
It's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
There are so many things that we can eventually learn about our universe and the spacecraft that we use exploring.
We are a nation of explorers. During Apollo, we were on national TV literally every day because we were doing something visible that Americans could see and they could feel and say, look what we are doing. And I believe Artemis is going to come up and say, look what we are capable of and what we are doing now.
Artemis will stand on the shoulders of Apollo. They're going to have the eyes of the world on them when they start down this trail.
The science of a space flight is one that will continue to inspire. Going to the moon generates technology, more communications, more computer technology, more sophistication in manufacturing that help us in everyday life.
We have a generation that is ready, a generation with that technology, a generation with the education. Artemis represents the future in space. It is our next big step, and it is time to take it.
If you're just joining us, welcome to NASA's Kennedy Space Center, where we are showing you a live look of another visitor center. This is the U.S. Space and Rocket Center. Wow, take a look at all of those people who are there hoping to watch the launch today. You know, this is the visitor center for the Marshall Space Flight Center in Huntsville, Alabama. That center played a crucial role in contributing to the Artemis program. So I'm
50 years ago, we went to the moon. We called it Apollo.
What many people don't know is that Apollo had a twin.
She was a woman named Artemis, goddess of the moon.
We are returning to the moon.
As a new generation of explorers, this time to stay.
And to prepare to achieve humanity's next giant leap of sending the first human missions to Mars.
We believe our course will redefine what is possible.
That we would discover life-saving,
earth-changing science.
And that the challenges ahead will inspire generations.
This is our manifest.
For all who wondered if we could return.
For all who dreamed of pressing beyond.
This is your calling.
We go for all of America.
We go. We go as the Artemis generation.
We go.
All right, well, good early morning. It's 12:32 a.m. Eastern Time. I'm meteorologist Brad Panovich here in Charlotte, North Carolina. Next to me is meteorologist Betsy Kling. Betsy, where are you at right now?
I'm in Cleveland, Ohio, Brad.
How's the weather up
Your
there?
old stomping grounds. It's not that great, actually.
No, I was going to say. It's pretty cold. It was a miserable day down here. Not quite Cleveland cold, but it was pretty brutal.
Yeah.
We're going to co-host this this stream, and you know this was originally supposed to happen back in August, and kept getting pushed back. Ian came in, all kinds of leaks. We had Hurricane Nicole. I'm thinking Dorian. I'm thinking back to Dorian, but Nicole delaying the Monday launch to tonight, and now we've had some issues tonight. I know you've been listening in on the NASA feed. What did you hear right before we came on? Because it sounds like there's going to be a delay, but we don't know the exact time, right?
Yeah, so we're currently in a planned 30-minute hold at T-minus 10 minutes. So everything to this point is completely on track. There have been a few little glitches along the way. There was a slight leak, a small hydrogen leak on the mobile launcher side of the hydrogen replenish lines earlier. They sent in the red crew. This is incredible. There are 3 people who went inside the, quote, blast zone, and they went in and they tightened down some bolts that were holding this valve together, and they believe they got that all fixed. So that was really stunning to actually see and think about these people walking, and you could literally watch them walk onto the launch pad, and like the rocket engines are right next to them 20 feet away. And this is a fully fueled rocket at this point. And they're going in and just no hard hats. They're just basically going in, tightening the bolts, and then getting out. So that was kind of problem one. That was fixed within 20 minutes. They left the launch pad back, and apparently there was some applause as they walked into the room there in the firing room 1 at Kennedy Space Center. Now we are waiting on finding out what the possible delay could be from a problem with the range. So the range is basically the safety group that monitors anything leaving the ground from this area. And they're the ones that are in charge of the flight termination system. And so we've heard about the range quite a bit throughout this entire process. What ended up happening tonight is the range lost communication with one of their radars. So they obviously have equipment to track the rockets as they leave the ground, go out to space. They have multiple ways of doing that. One of the, from what I can garner, is one of the more important radars that they use. They call just an Ascent, but is apparently critical enough that they called over to Charlie Blackwell Thompson, the flight director at Kennedy Space Center for this mission, and told her we are right now red. So if we were in the window currently, that would be a no-go. But they were starting to work on a fix, and what they nailed it down to be was a switch, an Ethernet port switch that they needed to change out. So apparently that change has been made. The hardware change has been made. Now they have to go through configuration and checks to make sure that thing is working properly. And we'll kind of wait and see what the determination is on any delay possibilities from that. But as of right now, Brad, we are still at T-minus 10 and holding.
Yeah, I don't know if you guys could bring up my computer real quickly, because I have a launch path here, and it actually shows the range. And as you were mentioned, Betsy, one of the radars is actually in Bermuda, because it actually tracks basically from the ground up into orbit. Space Force is actually responsible for this. So it's a pretty big range. It goes well off the east coast of Florida all the way out to Bermuda. So it's a pretty big area. And that one radar, basically, they can't track the rocket once it goes downrange. So I remember when the GOES launch was down there, we had a similar issue with a recreational boater getting east of Florida there out in the range, which wasn't supposed to be there. The Coast Guard chased them off. So these small things, I mean, this is actually a minor thing compared to the leak. So it'll be interesting to see how much of a delay it is. We should mention that the window's 2 hours. So it goes from 1:04 a.m. to 3:04. So we probably know we're not going to launch at 1:04 unless there's like a minor miracle, but we don't know yet how far into that window we're going to go.
Well, and I think it's important to point out why these windows are what they are, right? Yeah. So you're thinking, why is this thing launching at 1:04 a.m. and why is it a 2-hour window? Well, interestingly enough, you can only imagine the number of calculations that have to go into play to put this rocket into perfect orbit, to get it into the perfect place, to hit an engine at the perfect time, to start it on its way to the moon and get in the perfect orbit around the moon and avoid all the debris that could be flying around. They call these cutouts in the actual launch window. There are little time frames that are cut out that they can't launch during a certain time frame in case they hit something like a satellite or some kind of debris. But beyond that, they are planning on when this rocket or when the space capsule, when the Orion space capsule will be splashing down. They are timing all the way to the moment of splashdown. That's how precise this is. They have to have Orion coming back during daylight for splashdown. So everything is calculated based off of that. As of right now, the latest that we've heard is a 26-day mission. It'll be one orbit around the moon. And, you know, it's pretty incredible when you start to think about all of the pieces, parts that have to come together, not only before they fire those engines, but once the engines fire and after they go from there, how precision guided everything is and the timing that is just incredible.
Yeah, I know. I was thinking that back in August when we were looking at the different dates, and each date, the mission length changed because of that. And this is actually one of the shorter mission lengths with the launch tonight. It's 20 and a half days, like you said, 26 days. I think if they launch on Saturday, the mission length is like 10 days longer. So it's like really interesting how, like you said, the calculations of not getting that orbital path, also avoiding all of the debris, and then the splashdown. So it's amazing. It's a lot of math that goes into this. So I had that question today from a lot of viewers, you know, because they didn't want to get up at 1 o'clock in the morning to watch this. Like, why does it have to be at 1 o'clock? Well, it's not really up to us, you know. It's up to science and calculations here on when they're going to launch. So it'll be interesting to see, you know, if this gets pushed back later in that window or not, you know, what effect that's going to have on the overall mission. Because I'm looking at the countdown clock, I don't see like any changes so far. It doesn't look like they're adding time to it right now. I think what's going to happen, we probably won't know till like 1:04, Betsy, don't you think?
I would think that they're going to make a determination before the end of this hold. So this 30-minute hold at T10 would then come up at about 12:54. So I would think we would hear maybe quarter till. We're probably going to hear before the end of this 30-minute window ends, and then they'll start that countdown clock up, or they'll continue to hold. And then once they release that time, and we're getting an update now. So actually now is a good time to tell everybody, you know, if you're wondering what the heck everything is going on and what we're even talking about, which there's a lot of people who may be just hearing about this for this first time. Artemis is incredible. Oh, we have the update. Let's listen in.
Off course and endanger the public. This is a mandatory test that needs to be completed. Again, the range finishing the work on the replacement of their Ethernet switch that was rendered their radar acquisition and sending of the flight termination signal to the SLS rocket repaired. And so now they need to run an open loop test to confirm that they have good signal going into the rocket in case they need to send a flight termination signal. For the upper stage of the rocket, we are, well, let's talk about the whole rocket. Core stage and upper stage. We have the core stage in stable replenish, both hydrogen and oxygen. And in the upper stage, we're stable on the liquid oxygen side. We briefly paused fast fill on the upper stage, which is currently at 80% filled, in order to do a test of the vent valve on that liquid hydrogen tank. Fast fill has resumed, and currently we are in topping on the upper stage of liquid hydrogen. So that is just in. We are into topping on the upper stage of the liquid hydrogen tank, and we are awaiting the range testing their flight termination system with the launch team. This is Artemis Launch Control.
All right. So that was Daryl Nail, who is just the GOAT for all the media people.
Yeah.
He's the one who kind of walks us through everything. He's a commentator for the communications team there with NASA. And he has just such a knack for explaining everything and what's going on. So what we find out is that the communications problem that the range was having was not necessarily a radar, meaning a tracking radar, but it is the signal that sends the flight termination to the rocket if something were to go wrong.
Yeah, it's like the kill
kind
switch.
Of a big deal. Yeah.
I mean,
yeah.
that's pretty important.
It's so fascinating to get this information, and it's just constantly coming in.
But it does sound like they're still going through the fueling process, making sure everything's topped off and everything. So it sounds like they at least think maybe it's going to be an easy fix.
Is working to catch up to what appears to be
as we listen in real quickly,
a slip into the launch window, which is currently 2 hours and goes until 3:04 a.m. Eastern time. Now we'll get a solid T0 once the launch team is able to determine how much work is left. But again, it's based on the math and where we are, it looks like we are slipping into the window. But again, that's not official. We don't have a new T0 as of right now. This is Artemis Launch Control.
Yeah, so basically, we're going to probably go into the window. We just don't know how far yet. That's basically what they're saying.
Yeah, exactly. And then you have to get into the cutouts. Like when do these little cutouts hit? Some of them are just a few seconds along. There are a few, according to launch director Charlie Blackwell Thompson, there are a few of these cutouts that are a couple minutes long.
Yeah.
So we're really going to have to thread the needle, so to speak, on that one. Going back to what we were saying before, this has been a really long project in the works. I mean, 20 plus years of parts of this thing coming together. The engines that are on this rocket flew on shuttles. So that kind of gives you a little context as to the time that all of this has really taken to get to this point in this rocket. But what is this rocket? What is this rocket going to be doing? And why do we have this unmanned launch? Well, this is just the beginning of a very, very impressive and incredible amount of work that is still to come from NASA. So I thought it would be pretty cool to start off with a little bit of Artemis 101.
Artemis is the Greek goddess of the moon and twin sister to Apollo. And as the namesake for NASA's new deep space exploration program, it's a nod to where we're going and where we've been.
It's one small step for man.
And to all of us that gaze up at the moon, dreaming of the day humankind returns to the lunar surface, folks, we're here. We are going back. And that journey, our journey, begins with Artemis 1.
Artemis 1, the first flight bringing together the most powerful rocket in the world with a new human space capsule and all the upgraded infrastructure back here on Earth to make it a success. NASA built this mission on a solid foundation of know-how, creating more power, more technology, and more capability to propel us farther from Earth than ever before. There are 4 objectives with this uncrewed first flight. Priority 1 is making sure the Orion space capsule returns safely, and it's no small feat. Orion will be coming in faster and hotter than any human-capable spacecraft before, reaching speeds of up to 25,000 miles per hour and temperatures of up to 5,000 degrees. Engineers will closely follow how Orion's heat shield performs. Its re-entry conditions are so extreme, no facility on Earth can recreate them. This will truly be a one-of-a-kind test. Next, retrieving the Orion capsule after splashdown. Nothing will give engineers better information for how Orion performed than the capsule itself. They will also retrieve the parachutes that slowed its descent through the atmosphere. Third, testing out all that new gear. From the launch pad to the rocket system's precision time separation, the capsule's navigation, and of course the return to Earth, every facet of hardware and software debuted in this new era of space exploration will be scrutinized. And of course, there's a lot of science packed in, even if people are not. And the experiments on board, from deploying mini satellites to how intense radiation will affect electronics and future astronauts, there's more than just rocket science happening here. On its 43-day journey, Artemis 1 will cover 1.3 million miles, equivalent to more than 50 trips around the world. And this is just the critical first step of several, with eyes set on a lunar outpost and beyond in the next decade.
But our eyes are focused, not the immediate future, but out there. It's a future where NASA will land the first woman and the first person of color on the moon. And on these increasingly complex missions, astronauts will live and work in deep space and will develop the science and technology to send the first humans to Mars.
It's hard to believe, isn't it? I mean, when they say, you know, increasingly complex, they are meaning increasingly complex. These are incredible missions that they're talking about. And, you know, NASA Administrator Bill Nelson, who you saw there in the piece, is such a perfect leader for this. Yeah. You know, he was on the shuttle that launched just before Columbia launched. He was on that crew. They scrubbed 4 times on the launch pad while they were strapped into their seats. So you can imagine all the time and the pomp and circumstance to get out to the launch pad, get in the seats, get strapped in all the suits and everything, and get tied in, and then they just sit and wait. And 4 times they didn't get to launch. And then finally they did launch, and it was, you know, a successful mission. The one right after that, that's when the big problems really started. And actually, I believe it was Challenger. It was right before Challenger, not Columbia. He was on that mission right before Challenger, which, you know, interestingly enough, they just found another piece of that, we find out not too long ago. So, you know, it's all about getting it right. And that's why we've had these delays that we have been seeing already. You know, back in August, it was a major fueling snafu that they had a problem with. Then, well, first it was they thought they had an engine problem, but they didn't. Then a major fueling snafu. And so, you know, here we are today. The fueling has gone phenomenally well today, even with the little leak that was not on the rocket side. It was on the mobile launcher side of the bottom of the rocket. And as we just heard Daryl say not too long ago, we're topping off and we're full, and now we wait, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, as the public at large, we've kind of been spoiled by how technology works, that they just want everything to work the first time. But I think you brought up a good point, Betsy, that these delays and these kind of, you know, safety precautions is actually the way it's supposed to work. NASA is testing these things. They don't want this to be something that is destroyed. There's a lot of science on there. There's a lot of money on this rocket. So they want this to go off, even though there's no humans on this, to go off flawlessly. So these delays and these reschedules are actually part of the safety procedures that NASA wants to go through. They want to get it right. I remember tonight I was posting about, you know, another delay, and someone joked, 50 years ago we did this with people on it. It's like, yeah, but remember Apollo 1, 3 people died. All right, Apollo 13 never made it to the moon and almost lost Apollo 13. So it wasn't like it was that easy back then. And things are much more complex now. And I think we've learned a lot of lessons over the last 50 years about how to get these rockets into space. And let's not forget, this is the most powerful rocket on the planet. If something goes wrong, it is not going to go a little wrong. It's going to be spectacularly wrong. So you want to make sure you get it right.
It is. And, you know, the other thing to remember is this thing you have in your hand is more powerful than all of the computer power that they had for Apollo.
Yeah.
So it's one of those like wow moments when you really start to think about that. And they just have all kinds of new pieces parts that they have put into this Artemis rocket. But interestingly enough, all they have been doing is building on where they have been in the past. This is NASA's true hallmark of science, right? Yeah. They make something and then they figure out new ways to make it better and build off of it. And that's what this entire rocket that we are watching on the launch pad is. It has been a long road to get to this point of a technological build and development that we are certainly going to be keeping an eye on. I don't know why that light just changed that way. That'll be interesting to find out. But, you know, getting to that rocket and getting that rocket to that launch pad, it has been a long road. And so let's take a little bit of a journey back and take a look at the road to this launch pad.
You may notice that some of the components of this Artemis 1 rocket look familiar. The core stage and solid rocket boosters look like those of the space shuttles, and the Orion capsule sure does look like the Apollo capsules that took astronauts to the moon in the 60s and 70s. NASA has taken tried and true designs, upsized them, and outfitted them with the modern technology to make this Artemis mission a reality. But it's a delicate balance between progress and protection.
We're building a little bit at a time. And when humans are involved, innovation happens at a pace that still keeps them safe. So that's a tough balance. After each one of these missions, we have to innovate. We have to learn. That's why we do a test flight. That's why we do an uncrewed test flight before we put crew on there.
All right, so, you know, just to kind of put it into perspective, you have engines that flew on shuttles, multiple missions on shuttles that have all been retooled. If you'll remember, Shuttle had 3 of those RS-25 engines. Artemis has 4. Solid rocket boosters, boy, doesn't that look reminiscent of the old Shuttle days? I mean, there's a lot of pieces parts from, you know, the various missions that have been before that have come into this rocket. Including the Orion capsule itself. They went back to an Apollo era design style, and then they've outfitted it with all kinds of new stuff. I mean, Alexa is on board, and they've got all kinds of stuff that they've set up with the mannequins or moonikins, as they are calling them. So it really is amazing to see all of these pieces parts that have come together.
Yeah, and I think what's interesting today, you know, just looking at some of the manufacturers and the different private industry that's involved in this project as well, from Boeing, obviously, Northrop Grumman. You've got a lot of private industry that is involved with this compared to the past when it was all NASA doing everything. And one of the things I thought was interesting was, you know, from an inflation-adjusted standpoint, even though this is billions of dollars over budget, Betsy, it's still cheaper than the Apollo mission so far. And what I thought was interesting, CNBC did a study that, unlike Apollo, and Apollo did, you know, spawn a lot of industry and a lot of, capitalism afterwards, that they estimate that this whole mission and then the mission to the moon is going to end up being $1 trillion, recouping of money because of the jobs and the technology that they will advance from this. So I think when people see these big numbers, they think, well, we're wasting this money. Well, no, in the long term, this is actually going to all be recouped. We're going to all make money. And some of the science that comes out of this is just going to be unbelievable. I mean, the science on this mission alone is pretty incredible. Even though there's no humans on this test flight, there's still a ton of science going on.
Yeah, that's right, Megan. So we are clearly in a delay
Here's an
now.
update.
The NASA test director, who's basically flying the ship for the launch countdown tonight, has said that we are extending the hold that we were currently in at T-minus 10 minutes and counting. And so that terminal count at T-minus Eastern Time launch. We're now slipping indefinitely into the hold. NASA Test Director Carlos Monge saying that we are currently estimating how much work needs to be done before resuming the polling that is supposed to take place 15 minutes before launch. It then goes to terminal count at T-minus 10 minutes. Now we've got an update on the tanking of the upper stage liquid hydrogen tank. Currently 95% filled. We're in topping on that tank. It is the last of 4 tanks in the Space Launch System that needed to be completely fueled up before we launch. Of course, cryogenic tanking, a complex operation that has seen some delays tonight. We had a roughly hour delay after a replenish valve on the core stage liquid hydrogen side required hands-on work by a Red Crew team that went out to the launch pad and tightened down some bolts on the valve fixed before leaving the launch, and then launching, verifying that that work was complete. Now currently we're awaiting some work with the range. The 45th Space Wing, which oversees the range here, and makes sure that the airspace and the ocean out over the flight path is clear, and also has the responsibility to destruct the rocket should it go off track. They have been working on some issues with their equipment and sending a flight termination signal to the rocket. There is testing that must happen with the flight termination system that was delayed by a bad Ethernet switch. The switch has been changed out, and now the range is looking to start testing their connectivity to the rocket in order to preserve that safety function that they are responsible for. So again, we are slipping now indefinitely into the launch window. We're awaiting the launch team to evaluate just how much time is required to complete the work to get this rocket ready to launch. And of course, when we have a new T0 for you, we'll report that out right away. Megan, back to you.
Well, indefinite doesn't sound promising.
Well, no, actually, it's because they don't want to put any, estimates out there. So, this is all to do with that flight termination system, which we got really lucky. This is where Ian kind of gave NASA a bit of a bailout because NASA's flight termination system batteries were coming to their end.
Yeah.
And it requires a rollback to the VAB to replace those, to recharge everything. And it's not exactly a very simple process. So we had the delay, the scrubs that kind of had stacked things up. And we pressed the limit on those flight termination batteries. Then you throw a hurricane into it. And they were like, all right, well, we're just going to roll it back. And it gave them an opportunity to do a whole bunch of things. Number one, they got to replace those valves that they were having problems with and test those. They got to change out or charge up those flight termination batteries. They also got to recharge some of the Cubesats, the payloads that are inside that rocket. So there's basically, I think it's 12 or 14 shoebox-sized satellites with a whole bunch of different experiments or demonstrations that are kind of tucked into a collar that attaches the upper stage of the rocket to the core stage. And once everything starts to separate, then, those little shoebox-sized CubeSats get shot off into space to go live their merry life and do their thing. And some of those have obviously had some issues because of this long wait, and they were able to get some of those recharged too. So it worked out fairly well. The real big problem that they're facing now is not just this flight termination system. Now they can't, we've got the batteries replaced. Now there's this faulty switch and whatnot. So that's all going to get worked out. We're also up against the end of the quote, let's just say called the expiration date for the solid rocket boosters.
Yeah.
That's coming up in December. And it's like mid-December, I think it is, 12th or 15th, I think. And it's basically, those solid rocket boosters in their configuration that they're in right now, they're stacked with that fuel. And at, the end date, that expiration date, they're supposed to be taken apart or at least switched out and redone. So there's a lot that's obviously riding on this thing, not just the testing and the future of the entire Artemis program, but there's so much technology that's packed in here. Let me go back to those Cubesats for just a moment. There's a whole bunch of different demonstrations that are taking place and scientific experiments that are going out. I had a chance to talk to the CEO of one of the groups that have a CubeSat on this amazing rocket, Team Miles, and their demonstration is definitely something that just kind of makes you go, wow.
Team Miles, a volunteer group led by Wes Failer, hopes to prove that everyday civilians have the right stuff.
We ourselves had a wacky idea for a plasma thruster, a new kind of rocket motor for a satellite.
Failer is describing his team's CubeSat, a satellite the size of 2 loaves of bread that may be low cost, but offers enormous potential to push science forward.
The business end is these couple little holes here. It's a little pink jet comes out of those and pushes the thing along. And we put 12 of them on the spacecraft. And when you spread them along the length of the craft and give them a little tilt, then you can light up pairs of them and you can turn the craft.
A new plasma thruster isn't the only tech test Team Miles will be trying.
It's going to run actually some high school and college STEM experiments in deep space weather. There's a group of students contributed a little gizmo. So we invented special software for that communication at extreme range. And we're going to be 8 to 10 million kilometers from Earth, so way past the moon.
If successful, Wes and his team could be in line for prize money and hard-earned recognition.
Our biggest challenge is getting the experts who think they know everything to acknowledge and accept something that's literally world-changing in terms of this small little world of electric thrust.
Big dreams packed into a shoebox-sized package.
I've yet to really embrace that looking up at the sky, but to think one of those stars could be ours.
Isn't that incredible? A credit card-sized electric thruster, and it's running on extremely low power. And it's just enough to get things to move around. I mean, in space, you play by different rules of physics than we do here on Earth. And so it's just really cool that they have that ability.
Yeah, I'm just looking, as we're running that story, I'm looking at, some of the updates from NASA. It doesn't sound like, compared to the issues we had with the leaks back in August, some of these issues they're having tonight, now that we've got the other valve fixed with the red crew, it doesn't sound like these are issues that are nearly as, I think, dire as what we had back in August, because it sounds like if we can get the communication back to the termination switch, I think, I'm optimistic. I don't know. Maybe I just want this thing to go off, but it does sound like at least they probably have some optimism that they're going to try to launch tonight, as long as they can get these problems fixed. Because they don't seem to be as big as issues. That fuel leak that we had, man, that seemed to be a major issue. And then at one point, like you said, Betsy, they thought it was an engine issue, which you're like, oh my gosh, they tested these engines down in the Michigan plant down in Mississippi, and you think, okay, they're tested. What happened? Well, they put them on the rocket. Now they don't work, but ended up being just another leak issue. And then tonight's leak issue, as you said, wasn't directly with the rocket. It was with the trying to replenish the overflow from the mobile pad. And now this communication issue, just an Ethernet switch, which seems like a simple thing. Anybody who's had internet connectivity issues at home, you know how that goes. Sometimes an Ethernet switch goes bad. But now they got to test the connection to make sure, because the termination signal is pretty key, because as they track this, if something bad, they need an abort signal to be able to get to the rocket so they can self-destruct or guide it away from land. So that seems like a pretty, not being down there, seems like an easier fix than what we had back in August.
Yeah, if you think about like reconnecting to your phone to the network, right?
Yeah.
Do a restart, see what happens. That's truly what's happening. When you replace hardware on a computer system, you have to do a restart.
Yep.
These are some pretty sophisticated systems. They have to restart. And then there's a process that they're going to have to go through to make sure all of the, communications are happening. The proper channels are all being made. And then, they have all kinds of safety failures and all different things that they have to make sure it'll flag when it needs to flag. And so, they know what they're doing. And And when they said 70 minutes to replace an Ethernet switch, my first thought was, well, dang, that must be some really fancy hardware.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, I did not start to think about the software implications of that and how they're going to have to do the restarts on all that stuff. So we wait and we watch. We're going to be patient because that's what we have, right? And we're still within the window, even with that, 70 to 90 minute time that we kind of were ballparked with on that possibility of a hold. So, it's funny. People are immediately naysayers and poo-pooing, the possibility of it going off. There's a reason there's a 2-hour window, and anywhere in that 2-hour window it can launch, even if it's up to the last 30 seconds.
Yeah.
And they can stop this at any time until the solid rocket boosters fire. Once the solid rocket boosters fire, that rocket is going somewhere, and there's nobody that can do anything to stop it except the flight termination system, and that's why it's so critical.
Yeah, and I was joking earlier tonight. I mean, this is the biggest firework in the world right now. If that thing goes off, it's going. There's no stopping it there. So getting everything under control tonight, getting all these little gremlins worked out is part of the process. But it does feel like, compared to August, it felt like, every time they would come on and say, hey, we've got this issue, it always seemed like it was something bigger than they were letting on. Tonight, these seem like more minor things. It doesn't seem like I said, like there's something bigger icue going on, because these are what you typically used to see with the shuttle launches. You'd see these minor setbacks during the launch window. Yeah, we got to, there's some icing, or we're waiting for this. And it would go off sometime within the launch window. Back in August, you just got the feeling as watching that first window, like, yeah, there's something bigger going on here. I don't think it's going off tonight. Tonight feels different to me for some reason.
Yeah, so they did a series of wet dresses, which is where they fuel the rocket, or at least they attempt to, right?
Yeah.
And that's what happened. We never got to fully fill the rocket. And so those wet dresses weren't exactly, they did get it, but it never was kind of in that live test.
Yeah.
And so when we get to launch attempt number 1, and we got to where they did the engine kick bleed, engine kick bleed starts, one of those word configurations, which is basically where they start cooling the engines so that they don't crack when they fire the engines.
Yep.
That was a faulty sensor. So they ended up not having a problem with the engines.
Yeah.
When you start talking about liquid hydrogen leaks, that's a really big deal.
Yeah.
Especially when you're saying, this is a pressurized line. So there's a little bit of a cool physics trick that NASA is doing every time they fill this rocket. You're using liquid oxygen and liquid hydrogen. Hydrogen is the smallest molecule. It's the lightest, and it can get through the tiniest of fissures and cracks.
Yeah.
So they have to be very cognizant of good seals and just make sure everything is perfect on that. Well, obviously, if we have a big leak, it's not perfect. So we knew we had an issue with that. Liquid hydrogen is pumped into this rocket, and the liquid oxygen is also pumped in. Liquid oxygen is thicker, and it takes longer to load. Even though there's less of it in the rocket, it takes a longer load time. So they're trying to kind of keep that rocket in balance as they're doing this loading simultaneously. So that's why it kind of takes so long. When we had the problems with the pressurization of the liquid hydrogen fuel line on the second go, which is when they basically blew the seal, and they had to go out and replace gaskets and whatnot, which they were able to do at the pad. Then they were able to do a full tanking after that. So that was when they really got to do that big wet dress, got everything fueled up. They found out everything worked. The problem was that, they initially, like I said, they blew that gasket, and the rocket was partially filled with hydrogen. Well, the same line that fills the rocket is the line that is used to drain the rocket. So then they had, hydrogen sitting in the rocket. They couldn't get it out. And there were just all kinds of little issues. They had to wait for all that to boil off, and then they could finally get started again. So it's really a tedious process, and there's all these holds and checks and balances and all these various things that they have to make sure all of the T's are crossed and all of the I's are dotted. And they will not light those engines until that is what it is. We get an update now.
Was studying.
Oh, this is a good
and
sign.
That's the possible liberation, as they say, of some RTV, room temperature vulcanization, essentially caulk that is around the Orion, between Orion and panels that come off to reveal the solar panels for the Orion and European service module. The problem is essentially this: the caulk has a sensor in it, and it through camera inspections of the rocket, they have been able to determine that it is loose and could potentially come off. This is the same issue that was brought before a mission management team, which evaluates additional risks to the rocket, just a day ago. This happened after Hurricane Nicole passed through and delaminated some of the caulk around the bottom of Orion that connects to those panels. The team has determined that this caulk that encompasses this sensor on Orion is likely to come off after launch. And so the engineering team went and did a full analysis on what that debris trajectory could be once it comes off. And they evaluated that it falls within the same amount of risk that was evaluated by the mission management team a day ago. And so with no additional risk, that constraint has been removed. The engineers going on further to say that the RTV, as was discussed a day ago, is a loose and pliable material that is unlikely to cause a higher risk due to damage. They say it's likely to hit the LVSA, which is the adapter, cone-shaped adapter that meets Orion and comes down, and the ICPS, and then comes down to the core stage. It is a rigid structure that would be able to withstand the impact of that RTV. So that constraint was just removed after discussion between engineers and the NASA test director, launch director, and mission management chair, Mike Serafin. And so now we continue on. We are slipping into the launch window. Currently 9 minutes into the launch window, which ends at 3:04 a.m. Eastern Time. The team is currently evaluating the work they have left to do and how much time it will take them to complete it before they can start polling for go. That would normally happen 15 minutes before launch, and we are not ready to resume that polling at this moment. And so we are going into the window. The question is, how deep are we going into the window? A rough calculation of the work, and this is a rough calculation, just for the benefit of those who are watching and those who are here to watch the launch, is no earlier than 1:45 a.m. That again is a rough estimation. This work has to be evaluated, calculated, and a new T0 given, and currently at this moment we don't have that. Okay. Just want to be real clear about that.
All right, well, that's the first, we got some info there. So folks that were listening in there, we heard a lot about that caulking material, and that was something we were worried about because Hurricane Nicole, did cause some minor damage. It wasn't significant, but it was this caulking material, Betsy, right? That's around the Orion capsule. And I guess yesterday they looked at it and said, okay, it could come off, but we're not worried about it. Then tonight they had to get all clear because if you remember the Space Shuttle disaster, what happened was a piece of foam came off and impacted one of the heat tiles and caused damage on takeoff. And so basically they said this material is so pliable, it's so soft, it would hit the cone on top of one of the solid, I guess the top of the rocket or near the top, and that's a very rigid material, so it wouldn't cause significant damage. So they basically had to give an all clear, like we're okay with the tolerances with that. And now it sounds like they're going through the other checklists and stuff, and we got kind of an estimate, but not a real estimate, but no earlier than 1:45 a.m. because they've got to go through this 15-minute process before they even really start the countdown again, right?
Yeah, so at 15 minutes to launch, they'll do a poll, and this is historic because, of course, Charlie Blackwell Thompson, the first female launch director for NASA, so for her to call that poll is a very significant historical event. And then at 10 minutes, that's where it's like really watching everything take place, and as it starts to count down, of course, you get to T0 and she's gone. So there's not a lot of wiggle room. So the more that they can kind of get out of the way now, and they don't have to worry about it once they're back in that countdown, it's going to be better for them. I think the other interesting part of this is it sounds like he was talking about a different part of the RTV coming off. So basically, it's a type of a silicone that they use, and it's very thin, less than 1/4 of an inch in thickness, that goes around the entire circumference of the rocket. And it's only a couple inches wide. So think about a very long piece of tape almost that goes around. And it doesn't have any insulating properties per se. What it is there for, more or less, is aerodynamics. And so that they don't have to have... so when we talk about, it's only rocket science. This is how precise they have to get. I mean, there's little like gaps where there's a seam between two parts of this rocket. And in order to keep that as smooth as possible for aerodynamic reasons, they use this RTV material, this caulking tape material, to kind of smooth that out. They get concerned if there is a little bubble there, an indentation, because that can cause the air to speed up, and it kind of wraps around and it causes heat from frictional forcing. And heat on the outside of the rocket, it's already going to be having a lot of heat going on. So anything that they can do to mitigate additional heat is a good thing, and especially at a critical point in the rocket, like, your Orion capsule sitting there.
Yeah, and it sounds like it's also protecting a sensor there for the solar array, and so that was the other concern. You're right, Betsy. You think about the little things that go on, because if you change any of the aerodynamics or the drag on this rocket, it can throw off the trajectory. It could cause the power to be disrupted. So, I mean, because like you said, this has been calculated. This is the amount of thrust and fuel we need. If you start slowing it down or putting forces on one side of the rocket versus the other, it can veer off course. So it might seem like a small thing, but when you're talking about how fast this thing's going, that's a big deal. Now, it sounds like they're okay, with that right now, and they're just running through these other checklists behind the scenes. And so it does sound like they're running through this testing to make sure everything's good to go. The fueling's still going on, as you mentioned. I think if there was a major issue, they wouldn't be continuously fueling the rocket, or they are basically preparing to launch this, it sounds like to me. And 1:45 is actually not that bad. That's only 40 minutes into the window, so it's not horrible. It'll probably go past that, but that still gives us plenty of time, because remember, the window's open to 3:04 in the morning. And as you mentioned earlier, I mean, they will launch at the very last minute if they have to. They'll get to the point where they can't launch, but they'll use every available minute of this launch window if they have to.
Yep, and it's just a matter of waiting it out, and they're going to be very patient in doing so. So we're the ones that are impatient.
Yeah.
I know they're excited to make this happen, but we're just, it's hard to be patient when you just don't know everything. And the people in the room, they're in the room where it happened. A little Hamilton side job there, but they're the ones who are ultimately going to be making this decision and bearing the responsibility of that decision should something happen. So I too would probably sit back a little bit and be like, oh, I'm okay if we just kind of wait and see how this one's going to go and make sure it's all good.
It's amazing. One of the coolest things about pre-launch is I love when they go through the go checklist and everybody has to say, ready to go, go. And you realize any one of those people could basically shut the thing down if they wanted to, because like if there's one, so it's, you know, think about having like, you know, you joke you have a lot of middle management or bosses. Think about having like hundreds of bosses and they all have to get okay for this thing to happen. And so one of them can basically shut the thing down. And so there's just a lot of people. And like you said, nobody wants to be the one that's responsible for something going wrong. So if I'm in charge of this one thing, I'm making sure it's 100% right before we launch this thing.
Absolutely, absolutely. I do want to go back to what we started to talk about earlier, which is the technology that comes out of this. You know, it's fascinating to me that people think that the only thing NASA does is make rockets and launch those rockets. There's so much R&D, research and development, and innovation and invention that goes into every single part of these rockets. And so it's a whole section of NASA called spinoffs. They actually track exactly how all of their innovation and all of their invention gets sold to small businesses and the greater public and how it is being used. So take a look here. This is an interesting little bit of information for everybody about just a few of the more notable spinoffs that you may recognize.
With a vision to explore the secrets of the universe for the benefit of all, NASA's #1 mission isn't to get men and women back to the moon and onto Mars. Their mission statement is to explore the unknown in air and space, innovate for the benefit of humanity, and inspire the world through discovery. And with their discovery comes an abundance of benefits for all of us. Aside from fun, freeze-dried foods, satellite TV, and the GPS that keeps you going in the right direction, and COVID-battling air purifiers, LED lighting, exercise equipment, and insulation for every kind of application and environment, you can definitely say NASA technology is a part of your everyday life. As a matter of fact, you may have NASA innovation in the palm of your hand right now. From the circuitry inside to the network that carries the signal, cell phones are what they are today because of technology developed by NASA. And the technology that gave us this picture of Buzz Aldrin standing on the moon, or the stunning images of nebula in distant galaxies, or our first looks at the surface of Mars, it's the same technology in your cell phone that you use to take a selfie. But you have so much more space in your life than you realize. If there's one thing we all appreciate, it's being comfortable. And many are, thanks to NASA's development of temper foam to improve comfort and crash survivability for passenger jets and space shuttles. When NASA made the formula available to the public, 2 Scandinavian countries merged to become Tempur-Pedic. Memory foam is used in everything from bedding and furniture to shoes, clothes, even earplugs. In an effort to keep astronauts comfortable in the extremes of space, NASA looked to phase change materials known as PCMs that would absorb and release heat inside a spacesuit. The microcapsule PCMs ended up not being the right fit for astronauts, but have found their way into athletic wear, sleeping bags, and underwear, and it's become a lifesaver for low birth weight infants around the world. The same microelectronics developed for vibration control during stress testing of space hardware during launch and re-entry came in handy when it came time to develop digital controls for tankless water heaters. The coding for those microcontrollers is similar to commands developed for shuttle missions and allows for the water to be at the right temperature without using excessive energy. NASA innovation has led to medical breakthroughs for imaging, sutures, and biometric analysis. Yep, that wellness monitor on your wrist is a commercial usage of NASA tech. The list is seemingly endless, but the innovation and invention will never stop. So who knows where NASA will take us or how they will help us in the future.
I just thought that was so cool. The circuitry on the space shuttle is running your water heater.
I'm like, the Tempur-Pedic bed, that's a lifesaver. So that's worth the mission alone right there.
Exactly. And I mean, think about all the other uses, you know, the material in wicking, you know, sportswear and whatnot. It's truly amazing. All of the ways that NASA is truly a part of everyday life.
Yeah, and the thing is, you know, a lot of the experiments you said that, you know, are going on and that will happen on the moon, they're just easier to do in weightlessness, because it's like science experiments, you want to take away some of the variables, and if you can take away gravity, it lets you test things much easier than you can on Earth. So a lot of these testing that goes on up there is going to end up being huge innovations for us, and you're just seeing some innovations in this rocket alone. It's going to be amazing to me to watch us go back to the moon with modern technology. If you think about our parents growing up during the space race to the moon with the Russians, and you know, everyone's sitting around a TV and watching that signal come back. Now we're all going to be sitting here watching on our phones in almost like HD. It's going to be crazy. It's going to be such a juxtaposition. And one of the cool things about tonight, I think it was 50 years to the date Apollo 17 went through their wet dressing, the same exact day, 50 years ago to the date. It's pretty stunning that it's been 50 years and we're going back. I just, you know, it's for me and you, and I know a lot of people out there watching that are up late, it's really exciting because this is a cool thing. I mean, this is something that I think everyone can get excited for. And I told my kids all the time, you know, your guys are going to be growing up when we're going to Mars, you know, and you guys, this is going to be your space race. And so for us, getting back to the moon is that first step. And I think that's the next thing that we got to look forward to, that we could go to another planet because of this mission. It's going to be incredible.
Well, and here's the thing, you know, you just don't know how this rocket leaving Earth will impact kids and what they're going to be doing in the future. And you know, it's so easy to focus on the rocket and lose focus on the people who are such a part of this. They're really the heart and soul that's building this mission and making it all happen. And one of the people that is really critical to this whole thing is actually from here in Cleveland. His name is Jim Free. We saw him in one of the stories just a few minutes ago. He's the Associate Administrator for Exploration Systems Development. Let me say it again. Associate Administrator for Exploration Systems Development. Basically, he is the one that is overseeing all of the development of all of the pieces parts for this entire mission and for all space exploration. So it's truly like he's like a number 2 in NASA. Wow. And so it's so amazing to get to know these people, because they truly are human beings, and they all have a story as to why they're doing what they're doing. I had a chance to sit down with Jim Free for an exclusive one-on-one interview. I'm going to share that with you now.
I'm Jim Free. I'm the Exploration Systems Development Mission Director at Associate Administrator. This is a long title.
Long but fitting, considering Jim Free oversees systems development for every facet of the Artemis program. It's a big job, and one he has worked toward for a very long time.
We lived on the flight path to Cleveland Hopkins, and I could watch planes land every day and read about the shuttle.
Born and raised in Cam's Corners on Cleveland's west side, Free's passion for space and flight stayed with him through 4 years at St. Ignatius High School and on to Ohio's Miami University. But his pursuit of an aeronautical degree wasn't always easy.
Is this where we can talk about you getting a D in your first physics class in college?
No, I prefer not to talk about that. Yeah, it's
Is there a little bit of a perseverance message to go along with that?
There's quite a bit of that. Yeah, there's quite a bit of, I've like called my mom, like, hey, I got this D, and she's like, all right, just come home. And I'm like, I'm not coming home. I'm gonna work through this.
That same tenacity propelled Free through 30-plus years with NASA, eventually leading him back home to Cleveland's NASA Glenn Research Center, where by 2013, he'd risen to Center Director in just 7 years.
Senator Glenn, like just being the Center Director here was so much pressure, representing him after having the chance to meet him. And Mrs. Glenn.
Free took retirement in 2017, but it didn't last long.
When I was asked to take the job, you know, I was thinking, should I take this job? Should I go back? Is this the right job for me? And then I saw somebody's post somewhere that said, I just got my dream internship with NASA for 2 months. And I said, how can I not take this job? It's the coolest job in the world.
Who was the person that was your role model? Who did you look up to?
That's a tough one. There's probably a few. Certainly my mom. she put me in a position to do the stuff I'm doing today. You know, my family today is just a huge support to come back and take this job. We would have these discussions as a family. I told them this one, and they're like, you know, you got to go back.
What's been the most frustrating thing?
I don't think I'm allowed to say that on camera. I think the frustrating thing sometimes for us that work in a bureaucracy is the bureaucracy. But you go through that to get to the end.
There's that tenacity again. So the end goal for free? Seeing Artemis do what he knows it can.
What are you most excited about? Like, what's the moment that you are
Splashdown.
looking forward to?
Splashdown. There's a lot of ways I really want to get the 42-day mission, but I don't know if I can go 42 days without breathing and eating. But for Artemis 1, I don't think I will breathe easy until that splashdown happens.
So cool to get to talk to him. We have a huge update coming out of Firing Room 1 right now. We have a new T0 sometime possibly between 1:45 and 2 minutes. The polling is expected to start up here very soon, so we'll definitely want to listen in on that.
Picture of our T0.
So Daryl Nail was saying that there are 40 cutouts that are in this launch window that they have to accommodate in order to set this new T0. So
NASA's test
everything is
director has
constantly moving.
informed the launch team to all switch to a common communication channel. It's called 230.
This is huge.
That's a good sign.
232.
Yep.
And what this means is that the entire launch team is now on one channel, and all future communication will happen there, whereas there are many channels. Now they reduce it down to one. Just heard from NASA test director Carlos Monge. I'm sorry, Jeff Spaulding. Jeff Spaulding's on. They swapped out. There are currently no constraints to launch.
Wow.
Great news.
Yes. There it is.
Again,
all right.
No constraints to launch. And they're getting ready to pick up with a poll to determine readiness for launch.
That's awesome.
So this is where Charlie Blackwell Thompson will go one by one through each of the consoles there in Firing Room 1 to ask if their system is go or no go for launch. And this is the first time this will be done by a woman. So it's very exciting.
I mean, that's the best news we've had in a while. I mean, it sounds.
Yeah.
That sounds great.
It's definitely good, and you know, it'll take a couple minutes for her to go through each of these steps. You know, this is kind of the old school. You saw this in the Apollo 13 movie and everything. Go, no go, and the setup for everything.
Okay.
It is truly
Test
historic.
director Jeff Spaulding getting ready to conduct the readiness poll, so we are getting close.
Yes.
We're going to pull up the audio now so that you can listen
Firing
in.
Room 1 is about 4 miles from the launch pad, just so people have a little context.
Rockets go.
All right.
All right, copy all. And Launch Director NTD, our launch team is ready to proceed at this time.
I copy all NTD. At this time, I will proceed with my poll.
All right, let's
go girl.
And attention on
Daphne, South
232,
Carolina,
this
so
is the
she's
launch
one of
director
ours.
performing the final poll for launch. Verify no constraints and go for launch. EGS Program Chief Engineer.
EGS Program Chief Engineer verifies that the EGS, SLS, and Orion Program Chief Engineers have no constraints and are go for launch.
Yes.
Copy, Greg. Thank you. EGS Chief Safety Officer.
The EGS CSO verifies the SLS Orion and EGS CSOs have no constraints and are go for launch.
Copy, John. Thank you. Range weather. Weather has no constraints and weather is go for launch.
Yes.
Copy, LWO. And mission manager. And mission manager, launch director.
Launch director, mission manager on 232. The mission management team has been polled. You have a go to proceed with terminal count and launch of Artemis 1.
That's Mike Seraphin.
I copy all. Thank you. And NTD, launch director.
Go ahead, launch director.
Yes, sir. On behalf of all the men and women across our great nation who have worked to bring this hardware together to make this day possible, and for the Artemis generation, this is for you. At this time, I give you a go to resume count and launch Artemis 1.
Yes.
Copy, launch director, and thank you.
That.
All right, we do have a couple of steps to configure, and then we will be ready to resume the clock. CVSE, NTD. CVSE here. Initiate recording of Orion cameras at this time. In work. R, NTD. RSR here. Perform the booster ignition SNA arm rotation enable.
NDT, RSR, booster ignition SNA arm and rotation enable is complete.
And I copy. Thank you.
Okay, so there you heard the poll from launch
All right,
director.
and all personnel, we are going to resume the clock here momentarily.
I'll feel better when I see the clock ticking down.
Getting ready to get that new T0 time.
It's coming. They're just making sure those cutouts are all accounted for.
Yeah.
And you know, it is very specific.
Was the NASA test director's poll. And
all right, and we have verified no cutouts at this time. And all personnel, we are going to resume the clock.
There it is.
GLS, you can resume the clock on your mark.
GLS copies. Countdown clock will resume on my mark. 3, 2, 1, mark. GLS mainline has been initiated.
Okay.
T-minus 10 minutes and counting.
We are T-minus 10 minutes away from liftoff of Artemis 1. As you can see, the clock is now moving. Let's put that up. T-minus 9 minutes and 47 seconds. The L-minus 15 poll complete.
Show 06:47:44 is the new liftoff time.
Affirm.
Okay.
You can see
So
all
what
Oh,
the
you're
people.
looking at there
1:47:44, 1:47
media.
a.m. Eastern time and 44 seconds.
You see all the people
1:47.
scrambling out there to get to their spaces now for to see this.
So yeah, so I was down there
We
in
went straight
August
into
for the
terminal
first
count.
2 launch attempts, and it's pandemonium. It's like Hunger Games out there for your spot. So once you get your spot, you put stuff there, whether it's a tripod or a chair or whatever. And so everybody's kind of getting all their cameras powered up because you have to conserve battery, right?
Yeah.
So you're trying to kind of play this game.
Yeah, I assume a lot of the photographers were doing that. They had to go back and recharge because they probably were out there for so long getting ready, you know.
Yeah. Everybody sits and waits in their cars because there's only the international media is supposed to be in the media center because obviously they're from out of town.
Yeah.
Alex Pandalos.
And I didn't hear
they have to be bused.
Did you hear what the crowds are like down there? The public crowds. I wonder if it's
Not nearly as much. So they were doing some video of the Indian River viewing area, which is bleachers there out at Kennedy Space Center. And you could see open spots.
Oh,
I was
wow.
stunned. I have somebody who tweeted me from Cleveland that said, I'm in Orlando thinking about driving east to 50 miles, you know, blah, blah, blah. I'm like, dude, if you do not go, you will regret it. And he's like, you know, there's a lot of people waiting here. I'm like, traffic's not going to be a beautiful thing going back, but at least you're going to get to see this thing and you'll feel it. I mean, 8 minutes. So let me just put this into context for people. When I was down there the first time, a SpaceX rocket launched with 2 satellites in it. And it was 12 miles from the hotel that I was in. It went up, I saw it, it was amazing, and about a minute later, I heard it, and then I felt it. That was a little bit freaky.
Wow.
That SpaceX rocket was 1.1 million pounds of thrust. This is 8.8.
Yeah, that's gonna. A lot of people are gonna
12
wake up
miles
here.
away.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Boy, that sonic boom's gonna be pretty impressive too.
Yeah, and you know, they had a sonic boom earlier over the weekend with the. Nobody knows exactly where it came from. May have been a Space Force test plane coming back.
That was the little craft that was up there for 938 days, and it's a secret mission.
Yes.
Nobody really knows.
Yes, nobody knows, but it magically came back down and fired off a huge sonic boom that shook Orlando.
Yeah.
So that was very interesting. Okay, let's see what Daryl's saying here.
Ignition and thunderous sound, it could damage the rocket. So the ignition overpressure and sound suppression system will flood the mobile launcher with water. You'll see that sequence start at
400,000
T-minus
gallons
17
in 20
seconds.
seconds. It's incredible.
Now coming up in
So you
less
can
than
hear
30
Daryl's
seconds,
voice
the
getting a
ground
little more
launch
excited.
sequencer will start bringing the high energy systems online, starting with
picking up
core
his
stage
pace.
pressurization.
You see a lot of venting going on here because they're going to keep pumping in fuel, so it's going to be spraying. All the excess is going to be venting off here.
Yeah, it's boiling because it's so
Fire
cold
one
that liquid
is
oxygen and liquid hydrogen sits in there and
silent.
just boils. And
listen
they're
for the next call.
constantly in that replenish mode, so they have to keep that perfect balance right at
Core stage
100%.
tank pressurization.
Yes, this is
The core
good.
stage tank is now pressurizing to flight levels.
That's good. That's a great sign.
They were able
The
to do
replenish
this
valve to
before
the liquid
the
hydrogen
rollback,
tank now closing.
for Ian.
The liquid oxygen tank will come a little later. Now we're arming the Orion Ascent pyros and transfer to internal power.
All right, that's big. Internal power now.
The launch abort system, or LAS jettison motor, is now armed. On this flight, the abort motor is inactive because there is no crew on board. Up next is the flight termination system, or FTS, which gives the Space Force the ability to destruct the rocket if it goes in the wrong direction. Let's listen in for that.
GLS is go for FTS arm.
The flight termination system is now armed. Coming up at 4 minutes and 40 seconds, a big moment. This is where the RS-25 engines and their bleed go to high flow. It's been a little tricky to dial in.
GLS is go for LH2 high flow bleed check.
Good word, we've passed that. The cryo team got the LH2 engine bleed pressure loop dialed in. They are now at the right temperature for launch. Countdown continues.
All right.
T-minus 4 minutes, 15 seconds.
This is good.
Up next, GLS fires up the CAPUs. Those are high-speed turbines which provide pressure to hydraulic pumps that steer the RS-25s. Stands for Core Stage Auxiliary Power Unit Start.
GLS is go for core stage APU start.
That now leads to the thrust vector control test at T-minus 2 minutes and 30 seconds. That can proceed now, and we will see the engines gimbal at the bottom of the core stage.
Yeah. It's really cool. They all four move independently or together.
At T-minus 3 minutes and 10 seconds, you will hear the go for purge sequence 4. That's a helium purge of the 4 core stage engines downstream of the propellant valve, getting the air and moisture out.
All in all, this is not going to be that big of a delay if they go off here before 10 till.
GLS
I mean,
go for purge sequence 4.
It's 1:47 and 44 seconds.
The core stage locks
They're
vent,
going.
liquid oxygen.
Unless something last second here.
Yeah, this
Again, as soon as those solid rocket boosters fire, that's it.
Yep.
He's
You
gone.
see it coming out there now.
we're getting to that point of no return where they're going to be launching regardless, like you said.
And there it goes. It's
So here's
closed.
that helium
Locks vent
coming out.
closed.
Yep.
Pressure rising in the core stage locks tank.
See the gimbling
flight
of the
level.
Oh, yeah,
engines?
look at that.
Coming up in 15
Wow.
seconds, look for that thrust vector control actuator test. Engines will gimbal.
I cannot fathom the energy in the firing room right now.
And there they go. The 4 core stage RS-25 engines gimbaling around, testing the ability
so cool.
to steer the rocket into space.
Yeah, people think those are just static engines. They move. They can actually steer this thing. So it's amazing.
Each RS-25 throwing down 500,000 pounds of thrust. All 4, 2 million pounds. All together with the boosters, 8.8 million pounds of thrust.
GLS is good for upper stage to internal power.
Now the upper stage has gone to internal power. So power is removed from the rocket's upper stage, the ICPS, and it's been switched to battery power. The same milestone is coming up for the core stage at T-minus 1 minute and 30 seconds.
So all of the arms that are holding the rocket right now will retract once those solid rocket boosters fire. That everything will be off of it, and it's moving. So it's a real tedious time.
The rocket's core stage, which houses the 3 flight computers, is now on battery power. So there is no more hold time available because there's no more margin on the batteries. So if we have a hold, we'd have to recycle back to T-minus 10 minutes and recharge those batteries. The count continues. A note now, shortly after liftoff.
1 minute.
Shortly after liftoff, Mission Control Houston will take control of the rocket, and my colleague, Leah Cheshire, will take over commentary. T-minus 50 seconds and counting. Coming up at T-minus 33 seconds, the GLS will hand off control to the ALS. This is the autonomous launch sequencer. On board the rocket, it will take over command and control of the rocket. But the ALS will check, make sure there's no holds coming from the ground up until T-minus 2 seconds.
Go for ALS.
And we are go for ALS. The Space Launch System is now counting down to liftoff of Orion on its maiden voyage to the moon. Launch team can no longer recycle the count. Sound suppressor water now flowing under the ML. And here we go.
Again,
10.
Hydrogen sparks to burn off.
7.
400,000 gallons of water. Oh my God, guys.
3, 2, 1. Boosters in ignition. And liftoff of Artemis 1. We rise together back to the moon and beyond.
Oh, guys, it's going.
Oh, look at all that.
5 engines on the core stage and 2 solid rocket boosters now propelling the vehicle at 128 miles per hour.
Oh, that's amazing.
Carrying good control.
Looks so much like a shuttle launch because of those solid rocket boosters.
30 seconds into the flight of Artemis 1. First milestone will be for the vehicle
Same engines too. I'm just so reminiscent.
This is the greatest period of
now those solid rocket boosters are burning 6 tons of propellant per second.
SLS now traveling 607 miles per hour. You're looking at 8.8 million pounds of maximum thrust. Quiet here in the loops in Mission Control. The 4 core stage engines are throttling down ahead of passing through max Q.
Max Q is the highest forcing on the vehicle itself.
Now 1 minute, 21 seconds into the flight, traveling at 1,420 miles per hour. The 4 core stage engines are back at maximum thrust.
Just spectacular.
The next major milestone will be for the solid rocket boosters to cut off and jettison at about 2 minutes and 11 seconds into the flight, so about 30 seconds from now. Again, quiet here in Mission Control Houston as teams continue monitoring the flight of Artemis 1. We're now 16 miles downrange from the launch pad at Kennedy Space Center, traveling over 2,800 miles per hour.
That's incredible.
Standing by for solid rocket booster jettison and shortly thereafter.
Oh my.
Spectacular. Oh my goodness.
Confirmation that the solid rocket boosters have separated these 177-foot boosters. Now the core stage continues to power the flight of Orion. All RS-25 engines firing, traveling over 3,400 miles per hour, 46 miles downrange.
Wow.
2 minutes and 36 seconds into the flight. Hearing nominal calls here in Mission Control Houston. We've still got 4 good engines on the core stage. Next up, we'll be looking for the service module fairing to separate. This is 3 15 by 15 foot fairing panels, providing structural support, protecting the service module. Those will separate at about 3 minutes and 11 seconds into flight, and very shortly thereafter will be followed by the launch abort system separation.
The launch abort system is
just over 3 minutes into the flight of Artemis,
narrow cone at the top.
60 miles per hour, 83 miles downrange. We just had confirmation that the service module fairing has separated.
Wow. There, look at the camera. Wow.
And that the launch abort system pyros have fired, separating those from Orion as well. For future crew members, we just heard the call for 3 engine press, meaning if SLS were to lose an engine at this point in the mission, we could still achieve a nominal mission. We would just have an extended main engine cutoff time. However, we still have 4 good engines, all at maximum thrust right now, powering the first flight of Artemis at 5,200 miles per hour, 148 miles downrange.
Absolutely incredible.
Well, for everybody who was doubting that it was going to happen, there you go.
No doubt.
You know.
We're 4 minutes and 16 seconds into the flight of Artemis 1.
It's a beauty.
Yeah.
So far, we've had a clean ascent.
Just
we saw
amazing
those solid
to
rocket
watch
boosters
that. I mean,
jettison
that's,
about 2 minutes and 11
you
seconds.
see some of the Falcon 9 SpaceX launches. Those look puny compared to what just went off. I mean, that was massive.
Exactly. 1.1 million pounds of thrust versus this. This is 8.8. I mean, you know, just stunning.
I wish it was during the day so we could have seen the plume, but at night it was just as spectacular.
Now traveling over 6,800 miles per hour, 229 miles downrange. Booster flight controller reports that the engines are looking good.
That's so cool. I guarantee you there's a whole lot of people that are breathing
Our core
easy,
stage main engine cutoff time is about 8 minutes
remember,
and 3 seconds.
This is
we are
still not the number one priority of this entire mission. The number one priority is the heat shield.
Yeah.
And we don't get to test that until the very end.
Yeah, that will be in December 11th. I mean, when it comes back. So.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the thing that makes this, you know, most of these launches, you're like, oh, it's in orbit, the satellite's deployed. This is just the beginning. This is going to be such a long mission. There's so many things that could go wrong between now and the end of the mission. So that's what I think is cool about this this mission is every day, I think, as a school kid, you could get up and like, what happened today? You know, what process is going on with the mission now? So there'll be something new and cool that happens every single day throughout the next 26 days.
People will be able to track it, and you know, this is going to be something that we talk about for a long time. You know, for some people, this will be the "do you remember where you were" moment.
Yeah.
For other people, it's just kind of a, you know, another, oh gosh, wonder what's going to happen after this, and then it's just going to do nothing but start to get more incredible afterwards. Of course, the next mission expected to be manned, and it's Artemis 3 that we're expecting humans back on the moon, including the first person of color and the first woman.
Yep.
Artemis 4, we build out Gateway, and you know, Artemis 5, we keep on rolling. So it's all in the plans. It's all in the work. It's just taking some time.
Yeah, this is the step. I mean, like you said, I mean, for people that don't understand how monumental this was tonight, mission 3, 4, and 5, they'll probably figure it out. You're going to look back on tonight and go, this is where it all started. This was the mission that set it all, you know, on its current course, because this, you know, we're going to the moon. We're going to have a base there. This is going to be a stepping stone to Mars. It really is one of those monumental moments. I think people, even if they don't understand, they're sound asleep right now, they'll wake up tomorrow morning and understand what a big deal this actually was for all of mankind, just not in the United States, because we've got a lot of international partners involved in this mission as well. And so this is going to be a huge, huge something positive that we can all kind of rally around, because this is going to be great for all of mankind.
Yeah. So these main engines are going to burn for 8 minutes total, and then they cut off.
Now until core stage
and
main engine cut off. All 4 engines
there you go.
Throttle down.
Then we'll have SLS separation from the upper stage. And then that's where it's kind of like a little Russian doll. It starts to uncork a little bit.
Yeah.
So we get to see the ICPS, which is like another rocket that is the bottom of the white part that you see there at the top. That's the rocket that will take it out of Earth orbit and send it on its way to the moon.
Yeah, it's interesting to see such a large section of the rocket still intact here, because there's still so much thrust going on.
The flight dynamics officer reports that we have a nominal main engine cutoff.
So they're the main
engines. And we just heard the call for core stage separation. That means Orion and the interim cryogenic propulsion stage are now flying free from the core stage of the Space Launch System. The next milestone will be solar array deploy approximately 18 minutes after liftoff. But before Orion stretches its wings, let's check back in with our friends at Kennedy Space Center and hear all about what it was like to hear the rocket roar off the launch pad.
Let's listen to this. I want to hear
all about it.
Yeah, I think for anybody who's gone through rocket launches down there, this had to be a unique experience, even for a seasoned rocket watcher down there.
There were a few journalists down there that I got to talk to who were there during Shuttle and saw numerous Shuttle launches, and they said it's just the ground shakes, and the Shuttle was not nearly this incredible. And I just can't imagine, there's the turning basin there right in front of the media area is the turning basin where they bring all the big pieces in of the rocket before they stack it in the VAB and whatnot. And they bring SpaceX through there and all kinds of stuff. I kept thinking to myself as I was down there looking at that, when the rocket goes up, all that water is going to be jumping because of the shaking. And I was like, my gosh, if there's if we get a gator coming up out of there, I'm going to be not paying attention. I'm going to be going down quickly.
Yeah.
For sure.
Yeah, I can't imagine the feel of that, because that's so much thrust. I mean, that you've basically experienced the most powerful rocket launch in the world. It's just... That's probably and I remember being down there for Ghost 16 and the feeling of the thrust from a smaller rocket. I can't imagine the size of this one, what it felt like. I mean, that's all you remember from a launch when you're down there is, it's beautiful, but the sound and that delayed sound, it's just like, it's crazy.
Yeah, so I can't wait to see the video from, and they'll be posting it pretty soon. The bandwidth out at the media site is like non-existent, so it's really hard to get video out. And so it'll take a little while for us to get to see what it was like there, to stand there and feel it. I'm sure there'll be video coming out of the firing room too, where Charlie Blackwell Thompson and the team were, because they'll obviously have felt it too. For those of you who kind of have a little bit of situational awareness with Kennedy Space Center, the firing room 1 is kind of an extension of the vehicle assembly building. And it's a very nondescript looking building from the back, but the front is this really cool angular window that with these pipes in it. And it's kind of a really cool looking architectural structure. And I didn't know where it was initially when I was down there and standing in the media area, and you kind of look around, you can see everything because the media area has a nice big hill. And then I looked over and I saw, people getting in a car and driving out along this road that takes you out to the launch pad. And I was like, oh, I bet that's where the important people are. And then they have, meanwhile, behind you, this huge office building, this huge brand new office building. And if you remember, for the first launch attempt, Vice President Kamala Harris came down. And so we were down at the, on the lawn for the media area. We turned around and Kamala Harris and the whole group was up on a balcony overlooking everything and just kind of getting the lay of the land. So that was really interesting. Have all the dignitaries there and whatnot.
Hey guys, I was just pulling it up on the Ghost 16 satellite, and I could see the plume on the nighttime microphysics channel on the GHOST satellite. So I don't know if you guys can bring it up real quickly. It's a really cool image because the mesoscale sector was actually over Florida for tonight. And if you look off of the coast there, you'll see the plume. I mean, that tells you how big of a rocket that is, that it shows up so distinctly on the weather satellite imagery. You can actually see the plume and the fire coming out of the back of the rocket as it launches off from
Wow.
from the Cape.
Yeah, you can right there in the middle.
So you see how, and I'm going back and forth with it, toggling back and forth, but
Put your mouse up
So
where
right
it
there.
is, just so people,
look,
and
so
then toggle
everybody's
it.
seeing
It's so
right
cool.
there. I'll zoom in on it even more. So right there, that's the plume. You can zoom back in there. But I'll bring it back down here and I'll show you. I'm going to go back and forth a couple times, but you see right there on the screen. I mean, so that's the actual rocket launching. So this is the GHOST 16. This is a 30-second update. So you're getting the first couple minutes of the launch there. And if you look right after, you actually see the little trail that goes, and that's the plume left in the sky. So think about this during the day. It would have been really spectacular. But yeah, that's pretty incredible. I mean, that is cool. And, you know, just looking at that kind of shows you how big of a rocket that was. The fact that you could pick that up so easily on the satellite imagery, that's stunning. Yeah, I'm going to have to save that for posterity. I mean, that's amazing. Really cool to see that.
Well, I can't wait to see what people who wake up tomorrow morning go, wow, it happened.
Yeah.
And I can go to work and say, I was watching, it was so great. So we know we're going to get an update here from Charlie Blackwell Toms that we're going to take that live for you, of course, because what a historic night for her, an incredible night for her.
Yeah.
And that entire room just probably electric at this point. They can finally get some sleep.
Yeah, that's just, it's just amazing. I mean, that's just, and you know, I mean, as much as we were, you know, fretting about all the delays, it's even worse for the people involved in this. And so it's got to feel like a mountain has been lifted off a lot of these people's backs that they were actually able to
Something
launch
incredibly
this tonight.
special. The first launch of Artemis. The first step in returning our country to the moon and on to Mars.
A little emotional there, to be expected.
What you have done today will inspire generations to come. So thank you. Thank you for your resilience. You know, I said at the pre-test briefing, the harder the climb, the better the view. We showed the Space Coast tonight. What a beautiful view it is. So congratulations.
What an amazing night.
So we got a
for
couple
her
of traditions
and for everybody
here
in that
in
room.
launch control.
Oh, here we go.
And the first one is when you're in the position for the first time, you get a tie cutting. And so I have my launch director scissors. And I'm going to get my tie cut by a couple of legends that are here. And then anyone who wants their tie cut will be making the rounds in the firing room. You got your console chiefs. If they want to do it, that's fine. If you want me to do it, you might have to wait a little while, but I'll stay all night if I have to. It'll be my pleasure to cut ties. So I'm going to take care of mine, and then I have one other presentation that I want to make this evening.
So that will probably end up in a museum. Her tie, or at least part of her tie, will probably end up in a museum, maybe one of the Smithsonian Air and Space Museums.
Yeah, it's kind of cool that
or if
they're
not
they're letting this be
NASA.
seen on the public. This is something that would have happened behind the scenes for previous missions, but the public gets to see what a huge deal this was.
Yep. So then now she'll go around and start chopping ties. Who knows where this started?
Yeah, it's one of those things, if you're in the industry, they probably think, God, this is normal, but people outside like, what are they cutting ties for? That seems so odd. And I'm not cutting my tie because they got my good weather tie on tonight, so I can't cut mine.
Yeah, no, I promise I'm not going to cut your tie. Yeah, definitely don't want to do that. So, wow, that truly was just what an amazing sight to get to see. And thanks to everybody who's been hanging out with us here on the stream and watching as well. As you can imagine, there's more to come, not only from the Artemis rocket itself, but there's all kinds of stuff going on behind the scenes too. As soon as those solid rocket boosters fire, we mentioned that the rocket is going. And at that moment, Charlie Blackwell Thompson handed over to Flight Director Rick LeBrode in Houston. So now Houston has control.
Yeah.
And, it's Mission Control is now the one in charge.
Chatted with NASA's Sean Fuller about the start of this new era, which will pave the way for humans to go to the moon and eventually Mars.
There's a great buzz around here at the Johnson Space Center.
Because this rocket, now staged at Kennedy Space Center, is scheduled to launch Monday. And when it does, Mission Control here in Houston will manage the 42-day Artemis 1 mission.
We've done a lot of testing on the ground ahead of time. You test all the systems, but as an integrated vehicle, this is the first time to fly it.
Fly it roughly 40,000 miles to the far side of the moon and back, farther than any space vehicle has ever carried humans. Still just a stepping stone toward the final destination.
The moon is about 240,000 miles away, but it's significantly closer to Mars.
So the moon can be kind of a base camp.
We're really expanding the frontier of human exploration out to the moon, and then doing that scouting mission out to Mars too in the future, where we look to then eventually expand beyond that as well.
Like so many at NASA, Fuller hopes Artemis, like Apollo did, will ignite a curiosity about space.
We as a human species, we've always been exploring what's over the next hill, what's over the next mountain, what's west of the Mississippi River. All that exploration, we're just doing that now off of the Earth.
This is really exciting. They'll eventually
be
swept back
we are
the
waiting
vehicle
on the solar arrays to deploy, and we're getting some pictures. These are live pictures coming off now, not an animation.
On the end of each solar array is a camera that will
this actually is coming out of this Orion capsule, the service module underneath it. There they go. See the solar arrays? And so these are going to stretch out a little bit. They've got the cameras to take a look at everything.
The Apollo capsule design, there were no solar arrays. We had fuel cells instead. So this design with arrays
cool
gives us the opportunity
I mean, that's an
to
important
stay
part
in
because
orbit
this is going to be
longer,
the
since
power
we
now for the
practically
Orion
have
capsule.
no limit
Those
to
solar
the
panels are
energy
huge.
available for use from the sun.
And that was part of that tape that got damaged in Nicole that was holding in, I think, the sensor that was supposed to help deploy these. So that was obviously wasn't damaged at all. That they're being deployed right now. That's a good sign.
Unfolding now. And again, Artemis 1 is a flight test. It's paving the way.
So after the wings deploy here, the solar arrays deploy, we have about a half-hour wait as they do some checks on all of this before we have a burn from the ICPS that would be kind of an elevation of the Orion capsule and the European Space Module, this whole upper stage. And then another burn takes place about a half hour after that, half hour, 40 minutes after that, which is the translunar injection. That's a big one. Yeah. That is the precision timed burn that will put the entire capsule on the proper path to go around the moon. And so that is like one of the high test moments.
Yeah. It's funny you said the bandwidth down there's kind of bad. We're just starting to get some pictures and social media posts. And some of my friends that live in the Orlando area, it was spectacular from Orlando. It looked like sunrise. It was lighting up the eastern sky. It was so bright. So people in Florida probably that didn't know what was going on, most of them probably did, but if they thought it wasn't going to happen tonight, I'm sure they woke up pretty quick when this was going off because It looks spectacular from a long ways away down in Florida even.
Yeah, I mean, they were supposed to be able to see it clear up to South Carolina, even.
Almost the Savannah,
7 minutes
Charleston
after launch.
area. Yeah, so it's...
Yeah.
We had some clouds down there, which wasn't probably the greatest, but man, the views from like Miami and Orlando and Tampa seem to be amazing.
Just so cool to see. So after we get the wings out, after we do this perigee maneuver and then the translunar injection burn, then the ICPS separates from Orion, and Orion and the European Service Module are on their way to the moon. And you know, it's just clicking right now. Everything has gone perfectly. Which is so fantastic for all of the folks who've been working so hard on all of this over the last, 20 years, but really putting in intense work over the last, 5 to 10 years to get all of this put together. Just incredible.
Yeah, so this little slingshot
by the way,
maneuver, is going to be huge to get it all the way to the moon. I mean, because it's got to get in that orbital shot. It's got to get that little boost to get all the way to the moon right now. And then it's going to do that orbit around the moon and then come back. So there's a lot. I mean, this is an important part that's going to happen tonight because these are the things that, once we have humans on board, are going to be crucial to get them there. So the launch, is like we said earlier on, we've been sweating the launch for 2 months, it feels like. But now, if all these things that could go wrong in the mission now to the moon and on the way back. And one of those things is the heat shields, as you mentioned. Probably one of the most important things of the mission, which we won't know about to the very, very end. And so when you think about all the things we've been sweating with the launch and the orbit around the moon, and now, the thing that we're going to worry about for the next 26 days is that heat shield going to hold up when they come back?
Yeah, it's an incredibly important yet astonishingly thin, very important membrane. And actually, we have a little bit more information about that for everybody, I believe.
February 1st, 2003. Space Shuttle Columbia disintegrated on re-entry, killing 7 astronauts. An investigation pointed to failure of Columbia's heat shield, damaged during launch. It's a disaster still on the minds of many as NASA begins a new generation of human spaceflight, going farther and overcoming new challenges.
When you come back in from a distant place like the moon as opposed to the space shuttle, you're going much faster. And when you do your re-entry, it's a lot hotter and faster, right? So that translates into a lot of heat on the heat shield.
The heat shield's Apollo-like design deflects the heat of re-entry, while 180 blocks of an outer material called avcoat erodes as it heats up in order to carry the heat away. Measuring 16.5 feet wide, it's the largest heat shield of its kind, though only 1.6 inches at its thickest.
You come in, it's about 5,000 degrees at the bottom of the heat shield, 25,000 miles an hour barreling through the atmosphere. And on a crewed mission, the crew's only going to be about 3 or 4 feet away from that.
3 or 4 feet from 5,000 degrees. And the difference between life and death? A 1.6-inch membrane that is eroding away.
The only way you can test it is to get it out there and let it come in at 32 Mach.
Did he say 32 Mach?
So we have a long way to go. I mean, you have to remember, Brad, this thing is coming from the other side of the moon. First of all, this is expected to go farther than any human capable spacecraft has before. As a matter of fact, the calculations were done today. And they expect the Orion capsule to go 268,553 miles from Earth.
Yeah.
And when it does its slingshotting around the moon, it'll be about 80 miles above the moon's surface. So we're going to get some really incredible pictures of the moon's surface at the same time. But, to get it out to the moon, and they're going to put it into what's called a retrograde orbit. So it's going to be going the opposite direction of the moon, which is a little bit tricky. But that's actually the orbit that they're really hoping to kind of get established in for some time. And then to get out there, once they're going to use the moon's, gravitational pull, which is not nearly as much as Earth, but then that will kind of slingshot them into this orbital retrograde, the retrograde orbit.
Yeah.
Then they'll fire that smaller engine that's on the European service module again, and that will then do another burn that will then slingshot Orion back around and get it sending back to Earth. So it's like one after the other of just things that really seem like science fiction, and yet here we are looking at live pictures of this capsule and this, upper stage of this rocket in space right now, and how this is going to work. So you can see how kind of crazy their path is there with all these loop-de-loops that they get to do and how that goes. But it is just, we have some, this could be, that may be a correction burn. We'll have to see. The whole time they can fire off small engines on the sides to kind of get things lined up the way they want it to be.
Yeah, I mean, these are the calculations that are important, because all these small burns that are happening now, because they want to be very efficient. We were mentioning earlier about the smaller satellites and how these small little boosters in space, if you start going in one direction, you're going to go at that speed forever until something slows you down. So small little burns have big impacts on the trajectory of a spacecraft.
Yep. And just like we saw earlier with this Cubesat group, the Team Miles, they're using a credit card-sized electric plasma thruster to move this little Cubesat through space, and that's all it takes is to be able to do that. We can't really fathom that here on Earth, unless you're a rocket scientist, and then, of course, you plan everything. But
now, it makes me wish I had a good telescope so I could kind of see if I could take a look at this when it's going around the moon, which would be incredibly difficult to track. You'd have to have some tracking, some good tracking
You'd have
software.
to have a really, really good telescope,
yeah,
Brad.
it would be tough, but that's like a dream shot to get this thing passing, near the moon would be amazing. But I think that's the great thing about, I think the cool thing about doing stuff like this, about space and launching and going to the moon is, it's like we said earlier, I think any kid who could get it inspired to go out and just look up at the sky and start asking questions about, the moon or stars or planets. I mean, that's one of the other hidden things about these space missions when we talk about all the ancillary spin-offs and all the science and technology. It's the inspiration to young kids to get interested in science. Like, say, ask your parents, ask them questions. Sometimes when the space station flies over, it's just something simple like that can get a kid inspired to go, I want to know more. Like, how is the space station up there? How does it get there? How does it stay in orbit? These are questions you want your kids asking you, and inspire them to get involved in science, because those are the things that make science so amazing, because it's something you can touch and feel and kind of get involved in. And I think this mission, of all the space missions we've had recently, is going to be one that's going to inspire a whole generation of kids, because they're going to want to get involved in whether it's the space race again to the moon. I don't think it's really a space race, but just the technological advances that are going to be happening over the next several years as this mission continues.
Well, and that doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to be rocket scientists either. I mean, science period is so incredible. So what we have not told people who are watching the stream right now and in the future, is that Brad Panovich and I went to high school together in Copley, and we had a physics teacher who was incredibly engaged with space and getting kids hands-on experience. And her Stout, was that her name?
Yeah.
Miss Stout?
Stout, yep.
Yeah.
We built a moon base on our high school property.
That's where I was
and I spent a week in that
this.
thing.
That's where I was going with this.
It's crazy.
So not only did we have moon base Copley, but before that, didn't we do they put a camper in the front parking lot?
Yeah, we started
and they
small.
had all these cameras and stuff in it. And some kids got in there, and it was like a kind of a demo shuttle launch. And then that went so well. We had national TV coverage from it. I remember NBC coming and some of the other networks. And then a couple years later, we had Moonbase all of a sudden built in the backyard of the school. Literally, it was a movie with a fish tank and tilapia fish that these kids were supposed to be responsible for.
Let me tell you, it was a great science experiment, but also like a societal experiment to live with a bunch of kids in a simulated moon base for a weekend. And
Lord of the Flies all over again.
It was crazy. We had geodesic domes, but you're right. I remember the tilapia. We grew lettuce on the top, and we did hydroponic growing of them. And the tilapia, the waste from the fish fed the lettuce, and then we used the fish and the lettuce to make some of the food. We actually had pizza, I think, with tilapia on it. So, and everyone had different roles. You know, there were communication officers, there was government officers. You had the hydroponics crew. You had the simulated spacewalk. So. And it just goes to show you, something as simple as that, and that was one of the coolest things I ever did in high school, was to be a part of that, and it really did inspire me. I love that. I remember we had ham radio. I got my ham radio license through that and was able to talk to people on one of the shuttle missions, I remember, via ham radio, which is one of the things I got to do in that. So it was a really cool
That's right, you
experience.
guys actually got to talk to people who were in space.
Yeah, so that was a really cool thing, and it's like... I think I found a link to a YouTube channel somewhere where they did a story on it, and I went back and looked at it, and I'm like, I cannot believe we did that. It was such a cool thing.
You know somebody has VHS tape of that somewhere in their basement.
Yeah,
and it's just a matter of time until it comes out.
to be digitized.
What was your role in it? What
I was a
officer
government
were you?
officer, believe it or not. So my job was
I of course believe that.
Was to come up with the governance and like how we would run everything in there. So it was which was the interesting part, because once you got in there, it was like, oh my gosh, everything went crazy. So to have control of all these kids doing their thing, and it was a great learning experience. It really was. But
how many people were in there? I can't remember.
I want to say 60 or 80. There was a good chunk. I
thought it was like 80. Yeah.
And we had shifts, and the other thing is we had a whole bunch of kids that were mission control that stayed in the auditorium and were our mission control, and so everybody had a role. And it was a year-long process, because you had to be trained, and I went through first aid training, and we did simulated moonwalks at the bottom of the pool. I remember putting scuba gear on and having weights and walking on magnetic plates on the bottom of the pool floor to simulate a spacewalk. It was pretty cool. It really was. We went to a cool high school.
And yet I didn't get to partake.
Yes.
I didn't qualify.
Oh man, it was awesome. Yeah,
Shocker.
that was a great event though. I do think about that all the time, though, and I think that's the thing that inspired me to love space. But I think as meteorologists, too, you always just like looking up. I think there's something about just looking at the sky, and if it's not our weather, it's what's going on beyond our weather, beyond the troposphere, that kind of draws your eye to it. So,
right, and meteorology is a science of sciences, and meteorology obviously played a pretty big role in tonight's launch, too, because during the polling, we heard space weather, launch weather.
Weren't you a little nervous you were going to get like, oh, there's a cloud rule, cumulus cloud rule or something?
Of course, it's got to be the weather.
Blame it on the meteorologist, right?
Always. We're always the ones to blame.
Yeah, before we leave you guys tonight, we do have one more package we want to show you. I know because, this whole mission is about getting back to the moon. And once we get to the moon, we're going to have a new rover. We're going to have a new moon base. And so that rover testing is actually happening on Earth, believe it or not. And you have to find unique terrain to test this, obviously. So where do you find a terrain that's like the moon? Well, you go to Arizona. And that's where we find the rover testing.
Welcome to the surface of the moon, or at least the closest thing we have to it here on Earth, which is just a little bit north of Flagstaff. For the past 2 weeks, NASA has been testing the gear that will take us back to the moon and maybe even farther. Eventually, a rover just like this one will drive on the moon.
All the wheels are independently controlled, and they also have active suspension, so they can raise and lower when needed.
This one is a test bed. The wheels move independently. It can spin on a dime, climb rocks up to a foot tall. It's gone through a lot of changes, testing things out to see what works best in space.
So for this test series, we were looking at kind of different driving systems, like with windows or cameras. People spent 2 nights in the rover and 3 days traversing all over the lava flow, doing actual geological science, conversing with mission control back in Houston, and really kind of simulating a lunar surface mission.
He's not kidding. The rover has a toilet. There's a spacesuit attached to the back of it.
Do you want to hop up here and drive?
I absolutely want to drive. Are you kidding? Just push straight forward.
Yeah.
You can't go wrong. The rover has cameras that show you exactly how close you are to a rock, and it's very easy to drive, which was the point. It's meant to be intuitive.
Why don't all cars drive with a joystick? This is so much easier.
You should see Lucian parallel park this thing. It's a dream.
It even drives sideways.
Then do a pure twist. Yep, and just stay committed to that command.
The Desert Rats, it stands for Research and Technology Studies, are doing mock space missions to test out the new equipment that'll eventually blast off.
One of the things we learned with the lighting just over the head is that at times it wasn't enough lighting.
But it's basically an article that allows us to not have to bring like a whole pressurized spacesuit out here, but it's got all the comm capability, the lighting, the cameras.
They're even studying how to put a cell phone on the moon. They're trying to see how 4G cellular technology works on terrain like the moon and Mars.
What's the point of going if you're not going to send cool pictures back and cool data, science info?
The moon missions are called Artemis, and they're getting closer. They start with unmanned test missions to make sure it all works, building up for landing on the moon, hopefully in 2025. And that mission starts in the Arizona desert. William Pitts, 12 News.
Yeah, and that's, the next step is to be on the surface of the moon and building a base and having a rover, which would be really cool. And I think when that happens, that's when I think people will look back on tonight and go, what a big deal tonight was, because we wouldn't be there unless tonight happened.
Yeah, but can it parallel park? Let's face it. That's the real thing hitting humanity right now. Can it parallel
And I kind
park?
of feel like putting a cell phone on the moon might ruin it, so I don't know if we should do that.
Exactly. Yeah, preserve it for all. I mean, we got to have our selfies, though. That's how we roll these days, most certainly.
Yeah.
Well, Brad, this has been so fun to
Yeah.
get to chat with you about this. I know we've talked about it a number of times. And,
Yeah.
I don't know if you're coming home for Christmas, but hopefully we'll be able to get together for lunch or coffee or something.
Yeah, absolutely, when I get back home to the snow. But, it's been great tonight, and I think this is, I hope people will look back on this and understand it's a big deal. I think it's, it's hard for people that aren't into this kind of stuff to understand it, and it may not hit them till later, but it was really cool to see it tonight. And I could tell it was fun listening to the NASA feed, because, you listen to that so often over the last 2 months, and it's like, we're going to... The tone of their voices when you knew this was going to happen, the way it changed, you knew how excited they were and what a big deal it was. And I think that said everything I had to hear when I heard the tone of voice change completely. You're like, oh, it got me excited, because I'm like, that's not the way they normally talk. They're getting excited.
Mm-hmm. Yep, it was definitely something to behold, and I'll remember where I was at this moment, and getting to spend it with everybody who watched the stream tonight. We appreciate it so much.
Yeah, so thanks to everybody out there who tuned in, whether you're on YouTube, WCNC Plus, Tegna channels all across the country. We were streaming on Roku and Amazon. We appreciate you tuning in tonight, and remember, this is just the beginning of this mission. There's a whole nother 25 days and a half or so to go of this mission, and it's the beginning of a long process to get to the moon and Mars. So hopefully tonight is just something that'll spark your interest and maybe look more into it and get excited for the next mission, because there will be more to come in the future. So thanks for tuning in tonight, and I hope you have a great night. Sleep in this morning, drink some coffee. I got to get up and do a presentation, save my voice, because I'll run on adrenaline tomorrow, Betsy. Getting excited for this, so it'll be fun to talk about.
That's pretty much what everybody's going to be doing, most certainly. Well, thanks so much, Brad. Have a great night.
Good night, everybody.
I've always been excited about manned spaceflight. I worked on the space shuttle before I came to the Orion program, and it's that pushing the boundaries. It's going further than we've gone before.
As a little kid, I grew up watching space stuff, and I couldn't get enough of NASA, right? And then to see the hardware come together and see spaceships being built and flown, it's amazing. And the little kid in me gets excited still.
To be a part of it and know that there are crew on board, and when they come back safely, to know that you are part of that is very rewarding.
The favorite part is the history that has come before us and the history that has still yet to be written. We are in the middle of it.
It still shocks me sometimes to think that I'm going to be sitting in the Mission Control Center. It's like one of those childhood dreams that I wasn't sure that would ever come true. I don't know that it was even a dream that I knew that I had. Right? It was just kind of this really cool thing that I got a chance to do.
I have worked the Orion program since the inception, and so this is an opportunity to go from a clean sheet of paper to actually rolling out of the VAB with the real thing.
Some people work their whole career, on this vehicle thus far, and to see it fly is going to be really tremendous for them. So we're super excited.
On the day of launch,
It'll be time for folks like myself to sit back and watch, because we'll be turning it over to the mission management team. They'll be the one that are literally pushing the button and making it go. And from there, it's going to be just a spectacular moment.
There's a lot of pride, everybody working this team, and I'm so proud of them, and that they're big, so excited to get to this point.
I am confident somewhere along that mission that I'm going to feel a lot of happiness for this great team, just a wonderful team to work with.
I think people are, somewhat tired because we've done so much work to get here, but the excitement level is amazing.
4, 3, 2, 1.
Before Crew 4 returns home. Jessica, can you tell me about one of the experiments that will help return us to the moon with the Artemis program?
We do a lot of experiments where we are looking into developing new technologies that will enable further into the solar system. And one of those technologies was the AstroRad experiment. Radiation is one of the challenges that we face when we think about going further into the solar system. And so this vest is an option for providing the crew member with protection and